Hey guys, Peter Franson here. Sorry this is getting out a little bit late because I've been sick earlier this week, but nevertheless, welcome to Essential Issues Weekly, where I talk about DC Comics 1 week after their release on the Ultra tier of the DC Universe Infinite subscription service. And in each installment, I pick an assortment of comics to talk about as a DC fan, of course, and also explore what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, full spoilers for everything I talk about. This is your first and only warning. Here we go. Right now, we're going to take a look at just one comic, actually, originally released to the Ultra tier on August 22nd, 2023. I did continue reading, what's it called? What is that called? Night something or other. Oh yeah, it was Night Terrors, #2. The story still isn't really pulling me in. I'm just waiting for the end to see if they bring Wesley Dodds back into mainstream continuity. So that's all I really have to say about that. No, really, I want to talk about Superman: The Last Days of Lex Luthor, #1. This is a Black Label comic, which means that its connection to main continuity in the DC Universe is questionable, and they kind of leave it, I think, to readers to decide, or see if the story gains traction and stuff. It's really vague and non-committal, which I can understand would be frustrating to some. I don't think it really bothers me these days. But yeah, Superman: The Last Days of Lex Luthor, #1, was originally published on July 25th, 2023. As far as like its inspirations, it has a Lex Luthor that's wearing kind of an 80s inspired, almost leotardish type green and purple costume. So I'm trying to figure out where this falls into continuity. They've revamped that look for him and used it again in the decade since the 80s. But it opens with a flashback of young Clark in Smallville, and he is pleading with Lex to open a door and to let him in, saying, "Lex, I'm sorry, let me in." It looks like Lex is, there's fire, and Lex is maybe burning inside, and he's desperate to get him out. We don't know what the background of the story is at all, but the unveiling of this flashback incident is undoubtedly going to be a major part of where this story goes. In the present day material, though, which is most of the issue, Lex is terminally ill, and he comes to Superman because he knows that Superman's code is going to require him to try and save Lex from this disease that was brought on by, weird experiments to try to kill Superman. But how much of Superman's ethic in being driven to save Lex is actually about guilt is a big question in my mind. Hold that thought. We're going to come back to it. But Superman also has to deal with public outrage in that he's trying to save Lex Luthor, and plenty of people would like to just see him die. And so I think that's really interesting to see, see if they develop that further, and he really has to go up against a public that suddenly is angry at him. That's very unusual for a Superman story. And a core issue seems to be just this moral dilemma that brings Superman's values into focus. What are those values? Where do they come from? Well, it's suggested possibly in this story that humanism might be the source of his moral code. When Superman takes Lex Luthor to his Fortress of Solitude, looking to the bottled city of Kandor to possibly have some medical technology that could help him, he kind of fills Luthor in a little bit on Kandorian society and Krypton a little bit. He says, "I've come to learn the reason Krypton was such a wondrously advanced planet was because cold science, not humanism, was its universal religion." And so that, at the very least, seems to say that Superman thinks well of the philosophy of humanism. But humanism, while it can say as a part of its ethic that we should be compassionate toward others, does not provide an objective basis for why we should. Is it for the sake of human flourishing? Well, then that's just selfish bias. I mean, why not an ethic based on flourishing of ants or flourishing of trees? But then Superman, in the very next panel, without seemingly any justification, maybe it's provided in other stories that in which he's relating to the people of Kandor, but there's kind of like an elder or an official of some kind of Kandor that comes out and greets him, says, "Kal-El, to what do we owe the great honor of your presence?" And his response, even though this councilman didn't say anything with any kind of religious flavor to it, Kal-El's Superman's response is, "Rao be with you, Dragar Molium," which is this guy's name or office or whatever the heck. And so it seems like kind of an empty expression that's coming from Superman if his worldview is humanism, which would derive ethics apart from appealing to any kind of divine being. And so that seems like empty coming from Superman here, or at best passively affirms belief in something Superman believes to be untrue, which is, I don't know, kind of weird. I don't know why he would do that. Again, assuming he's a humanist for the moment. But at worst, it's manipulative, appearing to, agree with Kryptonian religion in this case, putting up those appearances for the sake of, I don't know, getting what he wants, being on good terms and good relationship with the people of Kandor. But I think that in most cases, we can maintain relationships without behaving as though we believe things that we don't actually believe. Of course, it may be that Superman is not a humanist. In fact, I suspect he is not intended to be viewed by readers as a humanist. There have been stories in the past that portray him with Christian affiliation, and I say affiliation specifically because I don't know that I've seen a story that actually says that he's a believer in Jesus. But he was raised, several stories reference the fact that he was raised attending a Methodist church of some kind, which is pretty safe given a lot of the liberal theology of Methodism, and allows him to be kind of malleable and flexible in terms of what other things he might take inspiration from to develop his moral code. And he's also showed some vague belief maybe in the Kryptonian god Rao, which may actually be what's going on here. Maybe it's not an empty expression, but it is something that is a part of his belief system. My guess is that in the writer's room at DC, Superman has agreed to have multiple influences that have resulted in his moral code, but is not a card-carrying adherent to any one religion or philosophy. And that keeps him malleable and usable in a variety of ways by writers that might want to emphasize different worldviews and ethics that come out of different worldviews. But it leaves Superman adrift spiritually and philosophically. It doesn't keep firm ground under his feet, which is, I think, what Superman is intended to be, is like this firm source of virtue. But he really can't be that if he doesn't really have a firm basis for his moral code. Ultimately, if I'm right in that he's not a card-carrying adherent to any one religion or philosophy, then his moral code is ultimately self-derived and corruptible. As it turns out, we might see even an instance of that in here, unwittingly by the writer. It's Mark Waid who wrote this, by the way, and I'm really enjoying the story. I'll get back to that in a second, though. But yeah, as it turns out, Superman's desire to save Lex may not really be about a belief that every human life has value. That's kind of what we're meant to, I think, believe, is that he believes every human life has value, therefore he must try to save Lex Luthor if he can. It seems like there's more going on, or something different going on by the time we get to the end of this issue. On the last page, a Kandorian asks Superman, why are you so focused on such a creature, meaning Lex Luthor, that you would risk so much? Lex Luthor being the kind of person that he is, why would you risk so much? And then we cut instantly to the flashback again, where young Clark is saying, Lex, let me in, please open the door. I'm sorry, Lex, forgive me. This, in big, bold letters, this is my fault. And then that's the end of chapter 1. So that clearly seems to imply that Superman really wants to save Lex because he feels he needs to make up for something he did to Lex when they were younger. Now, this is a very understandable feeling that we've all had. Including us as Christians. We want to make up for our moral failures. But biblically speaking, we can't. Because whatever we intend to do to make up for those failures, we should have been doing anyway. But that feels foreign to us because we tend to ignore God as the standard of morality and just develop moral standards that roughly match our already established behaviors, which is very convenient for us, but it's something that we all tend to do. And yet a truly superior moral code pursues the greater good without needing guilt as a motivator or desire to make up for something we've failed to do in the past as a motivator. Now, to be clear, I'm nitpicking philosophically. I don't assume this is meant to be a moral or philosophical thesis from Mark Waid. As a story, I find it really engaging. I love this character-driven stuff. And I really look forward to the next issue and seeing, just anytime you can have stories where Superman and Lex Luthor, their past friendship and, forcing them to work together that's really great stuff because you get to see the conflict, the internal conflict in Superman, and I love that stuff in any story. But I think it's also valuable to pull these kinds of things out and examine them so that we can use that as an opportunity to identify maybe where our own thinking might be getting off track in terms of how we view ourselves and what God wants us to be doing in life and what the standard for that thing is, and our thoughts about failure. What do we do with our thoughts of guilt and failure? Of course, that leads us to the cross. But anyway, I think those are all of my thoughts on comic books for now. As always, I'd love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Remember to check out christiangeekcentral.com for tons more content. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.